I'll get into the rules and read over the rules for everyone. We do have some information up here that George Phillips from Reclaim New York wanted us to have, as well as we have a flyer for George Bazama. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He's running for the Broome County District 4 legislator. So that information's up here, as well as a copy of all the rules. Before we begin, I would like to wish everyone a happy Constitution Day. Constitution Day, also known Constitution Day, also known as Citizenship Day, commemorates the formation and signing of the U.S. Constitution by 39 brave men on September 17, 1787, recognizing all who were born in the U.S. this forum. This is our 5th forum, and we pride ourselves on our format of allowing people to gather information on the candidates in a nonpartisan and respectful manner. We've had positive feedback on our platform from candidates from all 3 parties over the years that have participated, such as Donna Lapardo, Chris Bracco, Jason Garner, Maurice Hinchy, George Phillips, Fred Akshar, and many more. We've invited candidates for Governor, U.S. Senator, and Congressional District 22 and Sheriff. We have sent 2 emails and made 1 phone call for follow-up to anyone we could locate a number for. Shell Farley was unavailable tonight to attend, and she is running against Kirsten Gillibrand. David Harder was unavailable to attend. Matt Ryan has no contact anywhere, so we couldn't even contact him to invite him. There's no web page, no Facebook page, or anything else. Andrew Cuomo, Cynthia Nixon, Kirsten Gillibrand, and Anthony Brindisi did not respond at all to any of our 3 attempts to contact them. Tonight we have Representative Claudia Tenney, Republican Party, running for Congress 22nd District. We have Larry Sharp, the Libertarian, for governor. However, he couldn't make it either, but Andrew Hollister, his lieutenant governor running mate, is speaking on his behalf. And Mark Molinaro, Republican, running for governor. New York State Senator Fred Akshar will be speaking on his behalf. Rules of the forum. They're listed on the front table. If everyone could write legibly, please. 1 question per sheet or card, put it in the basket of the candidate that the question is for. Then our board member, Jim, will ask the question of the candidate. We'll try to get through as many as we can by 8:45, 8:50 p.m. Any that we don't get through, I don't think the candidates would mind if I emailed them the questions and they could send response, and I'll put it on our Facebook page. There's paper and pencils if you didn't come with your question ahead. If during the meeting you can think of any questions to ask, fill out a card, raise it in the air, and Ted will come by and pick it up and put it in the basket for you. Reminder, this is a forum for the candidates to inform us of their own views and solutions on the issues that they see. Each candidate's going to have 15 minutes uninterrupted to speak about their political platform, then we'll follow with question and answer. Candidates should not engage opponent or discuss their opponent's views. It's about them. A white card will be displayed at 3 minutes left. A yellow card will be displayed at 1 minute left. And a red card will be displayed when your time is up for your 15 minutes. And we'll also place the red card up when the answer period is done. You'll each have 2 minutes to answer, up to 2 minutes to answer every question that's asked. There's tables for literature, so if anyone is interested in any, they can head back there after the meeting. Rules for attendees. I already went over the question. Turn cell phones off. No cameras or recording devices except for the attending media. Questions are limited to single-part questions. There will be no rebuttal or follow-up questions. Unless it's a second question you think of and want to put it in the basket, that's fine. Unruly and disrespectful behavior to any of the candidates or to our proceedings will not be tolerated. There's no shouting out, there's no harassment of any candidates. We treat our guests with respect at all times. If it happens, you'll be asked to leave. So that's pretty much it. We'll start with Claudia Tenney, then move to Andrew Hollister. For Larry Sharp, I put them in order of when they had contacted me to join in the candidate forum. So it'll be Claudia Tenney, Andrew Hollister, and Fred Akshar. Oh, thank you. By law, I have to tell you, there's 2 fire exits here and in the back behind where the cameras are if you need them, but we won't, so we're good.
Just wanted to say thank you so much to all of you and for the organizers for doing this event. I think this is my 5th. My first time was in 2014, and just want to say thank you so much for having a great format, having an opportunity for candidates to speak and to hear what our views are, because right now there's a lot of noise out there with commercials and all kinds of things running, and I just wanted to first I know we got 15 minutes, but it seems like an eternity when you do like a 3 or 5 minute interview when you're on national television. And of course the first question is always, the president tweeted today, so what do you think? What did the president tweet? So a little bit about just why this, why I ran for Congress in the first place and who I am. I never really wanted to be involved in politics, although my parents were. My father was, particularly. He was a Supreme Court justice and a former county chairman. But many of you kind of know my story, but there's some new people. I became a lawyer, ran our family business, which was a newspaper. So we were like the original independent newspaper in our community, trying to go against the daily newspaper that I wish I had thought of fake news back then, but there's still fake news. But anyway, it's really important. I learned a lot from running our business. Now, I was an attorney. I learned a lot from that, obviously, but it really changed my life to actually run our family business and see how difficult it was to survive and keep it going in a tough economy. And I'm from the Utica area, which is very similar to what's happened here. And if you look across the nation, Utica and Rome and Binghamton, those metro areas, have suffered the same kind of consequences as they're very similar. They both lost a lot of jobs. They were once leaders in industry, once had, were real powerhouses. And our newspaper depended on locally owned and operated businesses. Those are our customers. And so for me, I, came back, I ran the business, and every time I'd go out and do a sales call, one more business would go out of business. They would get displaced. We had Walmart, we had the big box stores coming in, and each one of these wonderful locally owned businesses, whether they were like a small pizza shop or an auto repair shop, and all these hardworking people doing really yeoman's work to try to pay their taxes, to keep up. And I just could see the deterioration, and eventually we sold our business because we could see in the newspaper industry, we were like the first ones online, we're the first ones with a website. My sister actually did our original website. It was called the Mid-York Weekly and Penny Saver. The Mid-York Weekly was founded by my grandfather in 1946, and at the same time he also founded a printing operation. And so at the time, in the 40s, you could kind of do all these things on the same press, but as time went on, we ended up, we got more technical and we kind of separated. But part of our newspaper was a penny saver, so we did just weekly ads, and then we also added editorial. And I did a lot of the editorial. I went to all the meetings as our customers started, we were losing more and more customers. We had to get more innovative in the way that we were creating and finding advertisers. But I decided to go and try to give an alternative voice. I went to all the town board meetings, the village board meetings, the county legislature meetings, and I followed politics and was just watching what was really going on. And I could see that there was this insider group. There was just didn't seem like anyone could burst through what was happening in our community. And I'd like to argue that it's, I don't know as much about Broome County as I do in my area, but it seemed to me that there was an awful lot of, it seemed almost like the Republicans and Democrats were in cahoots together, in our community. Like they were, like our our county executive actually endorsed Governor Cuomo in 2014, and I was like, why would you do that? This is the other team. But so for me, I just, that was where I got my start. I was always sort of a bleeding heart, compassionate, conservative. I lived in the former Yugoslavia when I was in college. I worked for the Yugoslav consulate. And so, after the war in Yugoslavia in the 90s, I'd already come home and finished law school, and my son was very young. I was very helpful and instrumental in bringing the Bosnian refugees to Utica and reintroducing them to a safe haven because they had been persecuted in Bosnia. A lot of people don't, almost no one in Utica knows that story about me because our newspaper just refuses to cover that part of the story. And I speak a little Serbo-Croatian or Bosnian, whichever language you want. I know actually Bosnian. The purest form of Croatian is actually spoken in Bosnia. But anyway, basically the Latin version of the language. And then I've just spent a lot of my time doing that. So I got interested in politics when I just realized things weren't happening the way they should be, and the Republicans weren't doing really what I thought they should be doing. And so once we sold the business in 2004, after my father had passed away, I got involved in politics and really didn't think I was going to run for anything. But the former assemblyman decided to retire and said, "You should just run for my position." And I said, "Okay," and I'll go out there and fight what I call now the sewer in Albany. And so that's what I did. I got involved in politics, and I actually had to defeat our Republican county chairman to get the seat in the assembly because they were working against me. And all I was fighting for were taxes, small business owners, people our family farms who had been inundated and hurt by regulations, just like our small businesses were, difficulty in dealing with the price of milk. I mean, whether it was agriculture, especially dairy, our small businesses were paying some of the highest taxes. Our farmers, even with the ag exemption, were paying huge property taxes. And so I went to Albany and followed in the footsteps. And he's here, actually, by the way. Dave Townsend's here. He was our assemblyman before me, and he's here helping me drive around. But I got in there and I said, wow, what are we doing in Albany? This is unbelievable. It is like one party rule in Albany. It is really tough. And save the Senate, which is our savior. I mean, if we didn't have a Republican Senate, so many horrible bills would be, that I vote on time and time again, and when I was a member of the state assembly, would end up coming to the floor. And I know Senator Akshar is here. He's going to probably talk a little bit about the state side, but we have a real crisis going on this year. If we lose the state Senate, I mean, you're going to see changes in our state that are going to put us in a path much worse than even California right now in terms of high taxes. New Jersey just raised their income tax to 11%, which is one of their highest taxes. And so, this idea of spending a ton of money, of taxpayer money, the idea of what they call cronyism, that's taking taxpayer money and using that for economic development schemes. And we all live in New York State, and I'll just give you some facts. $8 billion a year our governor uses to run around and sprinkle this money around and use it to create jobs, supposedly, or economic development. But it's interesting. We spend 4 times more on this economic development with that $8 billion than any other state in the country, and we're dead last in job creation. So something's not working. And so I struggled down in Albany. I stood up to Sheldon Silver, who was our corrupt speaker back in 2012, not even during the modern part. I mean, I realized he was, using taxpayer dollars to pay off sexual harassment claims, and I stood up to him and asked for his resignation as the speaker because he doesn't need to step down from an assemblyman unless he commits a crime. And so I just was really an honest person, and I was a fighter for against corruption, and that was really what I stood for. I'm also a conservative, as you all know, and I believe in our Constitution. And I felt like it was such a struggle in Albany, but I could see that in the Congress, a lot of those things were happening as well, that we were losing our grip on what we really are. And I kept hearing people on the radio and TV and the big talking heads saying, oh, well, our democracy. And I was like, no, we are a self-governing constitutional republic. It is really important that our people understand that, because our founders knew, and this is why this is such a great organization, our founders knew that democracy would lead to some kind of tyranny. And so by self-governing, that means that it's up to us, each one of us, the people, as it says in the 10th Amendment, it's up to us to govern ourselves, to be as informed as we can, to be citizens, to do what we have to do to keep this country going so we can maintain our rights and our freedoms from government. And we've gone the other direction. We have a very large federal government, we have a very large state government, and that's part of the reason I decided to run. It's really important, these principles in Congress, and you get to Congress, and by the way, I just want to preface this, there are good people on both sides, in Albany, believe it or not, and there are good people on both sides in Washington. Unfortunately, we have driving forces that keep us from getting to some of the things we need to do. But I think that we are in a crisis right now in Washington, and that's one of the reasons I've been fighting to try to fix some of the things that we can't fix on the state level, as much as we may try. Some of the things like really high taxes, high regulations, the corruption that's happening. And that, believe it or not, I always refer to Albany as the sewer and Washington as the swamp, because, by the way, their animals can live in the swamp, and I think there's this really funny commercial they're running of me, like they're dropping me into the swamp with all these animals and everything, these alligators and everything, as if I've joined the swamp. And just for the record, and I just told the news media this, you're looking here today, your representative is the biggest underdog in the House of Representatives in the nation. I had more money spent against me than I had to defend, which is what made me the underdog. I mean, I have been able to scratch and claw through grassroots efforts, through the help of some of the people in this room, by just trying to tell the truth, by trying to stand up for our Constitution, for standing up for basic rights and being reasonable. And it's not an easy battle in Washington. You know, you get down there, and by the way, the Republicans supposedly have the majority, but the Republicans are like a large coalition. I think we have kind of a coalition government. And so those are things that, you know, you have to, you know, the Republicans have many factions. The Democrats have one. That's just no. They're not going to vote for anything, no matter how good it is. They're not going to vote for it. And I'm hoping that they're going to come around and be more bipartisan. That hasn't happened yet. But I think that's one of the things that I stood up for and fought for, and I'm doing that in Washington. And luckily for me, both my parents have passed away. My mother passed away 3 years ago. My dad passed away 14 years ago. And I have just one son who many of you know and you've met. And he is doing extremely well. He's a Naval Academy graduate. He graduated in 2013. He's now a captain in the Marine Corps. He was in the Middle East and overseas a few times during his first 5 years in the Marines. And now he is a captain and running an I&I station in Erie, Pennsylvania, of all places. And he's getting a master's degree at the Naval War College, which he's doing remotely. He doesn't actually have to go to Newport. And I think, you know, he's doing really well. So for me, other than my dog, I have a lot of time to be able to put into this job. But more important than that, I'm really passionate about what I'm trying to do in this job. I'm committed to it. I work every single day. I just, you know, it's interesting, you know, you see these narratives. I know that the biggest thing that scares my opponent and everybody out in the news media is that I literally go to events and meet people every single day. I've done over 30 town halls. Yes, we've changed them. We don't call them town halls anymore. We call them open forums now. Town halls and coffees. I've done over 100 meetings that are group meetings, whether they're coffees, roundtable discussions with dairy farmers on opioids, with veterans, with all kinds of groups. And so those are the things I'm trying to be as transparent and meet as many people as possible. So what do? They say she doesn't meet with her constituents. Well, that's just not true. And I have been coming against an awful lot of aggressive, we have death threats, a lot of those issues. So for me, continuing to fight the battle to lower taxes, to reduce regulations on the federal level as much as we can has been part of my mission. And we've been doing that. And as much as you may or may not like the personality of the president, but this president has gotten so much done against so much pressure and against so much angst and anxiety. I've never seen anything like it before. I remember when I was in college and Reagan was president, and I thought it was unbelievable. I remember when they denied Bush that he didn't win in 2000. Remember that whole hanging chads? And now we have a president that's being, you know, just tormented every single day. Whether you agree with him or not, he is so successful in what he's been able to do. We have had an incredible run in the House, and we have done a lot of things that you're never going to hear about, like rolling back the regulations, like passing all 12 appropriations bills on regular order last fall. First time it's been done since 2010, but you're not going to hear about it in the news media. You're going to hear about Russia collusion and all this other stuff. And it's really important that we break through some of this stuff and tell you about what good is happening. And let me tell you a little something just quickly before I end about the tax cuts. You hear the Democrats claiming that the tax cuts are only for the rich. These tax cuts were focused on small businesses, on creating jobs, and now, on average, and we're going to get the exact numbers from the Tax Foundation, somewhere between $500 and $600 million has come into this district just from the tax cuts to individuals. That doesn't count what small businesses have been able to get from the tax cuts. And you're seeing economic growth, you're seeing job creation that we haven't seen literally in decades in this community. Unemployment rate across all sectors, you hear the president talk about that, is really unprecedented. So a lot of really good things are happening. And what scares me the most is if we get caught up in the dust of what's happening with trying to deny the president the ability to do the job he's done, I think is going to be a problem in the future. But you know, I'm continuing to fight the fight every day. I want to hear from you. I want to meet with you. I've met with so many people. And I got to tell you, there are some people that are Democrats and on the other side who I've met with have good ideas, and we've implemented those. We've introduced bills. I do stand up to the president. When his very first budget came out, there were 9 specific items, whether it was community service block grants, community development block grants, a number of issues that I came out with, and we objected to them. And the first thing I did, we wrote to the president, we wrote to his staff, and in the end, we were able to persuade him to get those things funded and brought back. And not only that, I led the way, and those things are restored. And those were for needy people in our communities, whether it's Meals on Wheels, whether it's restoring public health care. I won the Public Health Care Award 2 years in a row right now. So when you hear about them saying I took health care away from people, that's just not true. So we do have work to do. There's a number of things happening, but I look forward to hearing from the other candidates and hearing your questions as we move forward. Thank you so much.
To edit this a little bit, can you compare and contrast your principles of governance with your voting record and with what President Trump advocates? So compare and contrast those 3 things.
I know you've heard a lot of discussions. I think one of the things that makes, how many minutes do I have?
You have 2 minutes.
All right, 2 minutes. I think that one of the things that I have in common with the president is that we both come from, you know, the establishment wasn't supporting me for years, and the establishment doesn't support him. I mean, even the Republican Party was looking at ways of trying to deny him the nomination after the primary. I think the difference between me is I think that, and with all due respect to the president, because he's someone who's been a business owner, I'm a business owner, I think we have that in common. I don't think he's someone who is deeply rooted in the constitutional principles. But I think that he's got good people around him. He's smart enough to know what he doesn't know. He's had some mistakes, and that's what's going to happen when you don't have experience in government. We all make mistakes. I just have spent a lot more time studying our government as a lawyer, as someone who's been involved in government myself, and I have experience. But I think he's doing a really good job. Generally, what's happening in this country is just really phenomenal. After a number of years of what I think have been devastating, we are now sitting on, you know, we had Obamacare, you know, passed, and it is really hurting our small business owners. It's hurting seniors. We robbed almost $800 billion from Medicare to put into Obamacare. We expanded Medicaid to the point where our taxpayers are struggling. So I think from that standpoint, I think the president has the same kind of common sense approach that I do, but I think when he doesn't understand something, he does reach out. I did have sort of an interesting meeting with the president once earlier this year, where I happened to be sitting in the Oval Office, and we're doing a bill signing on human trafficking legislation, really important because it's part of what our problem with the border is human trafficking and drug trafficking. And the president actually you know, turned to me and said, you know, I have some questions for you about various items, you know, these things that were legal questions. And I like the, you know, I was sort of surprised. Here I am with the President of the United States in the Oval Office, and he's asking little old me from upstate New York about government issues. But I think that the fact that he's willing to learn and ask questions and seek out people who do know, I think says a lot about him. And I think that we have that in common. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Congresswoman Tenney. Do you have any ideas on how to stop the blatant bias against conservatives on social media, such as Facebook and Twitter and Google?
Yeah, it is a problem. Actually, we're seeing what's happening with Google now. We're seeing it's happening with everyone. I mean, they're censoring Facebook, censoring Google. One of the things we can do is obviously monitor it. We can have a chance to look at it. But, you know, I worry about anytime we go in and try to control speech. We have this is a country that is founded on First Amendment principles, and you know, even the most hideous speech is protected by our government, and as long as it's not inciting violence. You know, the famous case, if you're a lawyer, where you can't scream fire in a crowded movie hall. I mean, there's a point where you have to exercise some caution. There are some limitations. But I think the censorship is what we're really looking at. And in Google right now, we're finding out, and also on Twitter, and also on Facebook. I mean, I don't know how you combat it other than I'd love to see us create another alternative, another portal. I think every time that, you know, Google, the executive just came to testify in front of Congress, Having other options, being able to control and call them out when that happens, I think is one of the things we can do. I do worry about limiting speech because I think it's a really important part of what we stand for. From that perspective, I think more media on our side, more media that's like speaking up and being able to be free and get on the airwaves. But then again, when you look at a giant like Google, remember the old days when we had one telephone company and they split them up into baby bells. Now we've got Google, which actually controls, it looks like, most of the internet or most of the social media space. So I think giving more opportunities, making the airspace open and giving other opportunities to other vendors to get in besides Google is something that we're going to have to do and we're going to have to look at in Congress. One of the things that happens, and this is of course really relevant today because we have our Supreme Court nominee being accused by an accuser alleging an incident from 35 years ago. But what happens in Congress is you have each member operates an office separately. So I have my own office. If I get accused of sexual harassment in my office or one of my employees does, there's a procedure that we go through the ethics committee. That's something Sheldon Silver didn't do, by the way. He went beyond the ethics committee in 2012 when there were sexual harassment claims, had the controller write checks out to pay off sexual harassment victims secretly so that no one would know about it. And that was actually a direct violation of the newly historic ethics rules that we just passed. But we don't do that in Congress, so what we do is review the what's happening in the ethics committee goes through, they make a determination about whether this person was actually sexual harassment or not, or whether it was sexual abuse or whatever it would have been. And then that determination gets made at that point, if there was a settlement, whether it was appropriate to pay that settlement. And right now we put a bill in that would say that we can't use taxpayer money, it was prohibited. That bill is sitting in the House. We passed it. It is waiting to be passed in the Senate. So it hasn't been done yet, just like we have almost 400 bills that we sent to the Senate at the end of July, and we've got a few passed and a few done in the month of August because they decided not to go home. But we have put that bill in place and to prevent the ability of them to use taxpayer money to pay off sexual harassment claims. But you have to always remember that members of Congress there might be someone in your office that's wrongly accused, and it also could be used as a weapon. And I'll just give you a perfect example. If we had a member of Congress who was wrongly accused and they had to pay for litigation and they weren't someone like me who's not one of the wealthy members, a lot of members of Congress don't even take their pay. So the question is, you can accuse anybody of sexual, you can accuse anyone of sexual harassment, and you could run them literally into bankruptcy without having an adjudication. So it's not that simple of an issue.
How do you think that we can resolve the issue of building the wall?
I love this question. First of all, I scream at the TV every night when I watch Fox News when Pete Hegseth and sometimes others say that the Congress hasn't funded the wall. Last year, as I mentioned in my opening comments, for the first time since 2010, the House of Representatives passed 12 appropriations bills on regular order. In those appropriations bills, we funded the wall. So what happened is they went to the Senate, Schumer shut down the government, and we had to go back to what we call a continuing resolution. So we weren't able to get the funding for the wall back into the original appropriations process. So we went back to the drawing board. We came out with a couple of bills. Neither one passed. You heard about them, Goodlet 1, Goodlet 2. They're comprehensive immigration bills that dealt with a large number of issues. So anyway, the funding for the wall has started. We got through part of the omnibus and part of the minibus that's coming through. We have started funding the wall. President wants it done. Our side wants it done. There is a moderate contingent in the Republican side that is not voting for funding the wall completely yet. But we're hoping they're going to do that. Martha McSally, who is our representative on that, the wall, basically the committee that deals with Homeland Security on funding the wall, is running for Senate in the state of Arizona. She is she's a great advocate for funding the wall, and she's working on that. She's a border state representative. And so we will get the wall funding done. The president understands right now as we go into the political realities of it, but the wall is being funded and we're going to have it done. And I think, by the way, I went to the wall. I went to an event where people had been to the wall with videos and what they're showing, what's happening at the wall. We have to secure our border. It is absolutely a necessity. It is literally a sieve. There are all kinds of dangerous people coming across this border. And when you hear people say, well, you're not sympathetic to illegal immigrants, it has nothing to do with illegal immigrants. It's about human trafficking, it's about drug trafficking, it's about people who would do harm to this nation. And it's really about security. And a lot of Democrats agree we just can't get them to vote that way because of Nancy Pelosi. So there you go.
Members of national and state politics want to increase personal and corporate tax rates. What will you do about this?
First thing, I voted for the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which has given us a newfound life in New York. It has actually given hope to our communities. You're going to hear the Democrats are melting down about this because the truth is it's really helping. Only the wealthiest people are getting a tax, in effect, an increase because they've lost their lifeline from the federal government, also known as the state and local tax deduction. Although I fought to get it increased from more than $10,000, we doubled the standard deduction. We added a lot of expensing items and good things by lowering the corporate rates as well, and that includes personal pass-throughs. One thing you should all know that 98% of the people that work in this district work for a small business or own it. They are not big businesses. So when we reduce the rates and we create jobs, and I will respectfully disagree with Mr. Hollister, we don't have a problem with jobs in this community. We have an overabundance of jobs right now because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. I want to make it permanent. I want to make them deeper. I want to make the cuts even stronger. We want to have everyone get a full tax cut. I went door to door in Endicott a couple days ago, and I went to middle-class neighborhoods, and I went up into some of the wealthier neighborhoods. Everyone loved the tax cut when I was in the lower and middle-income taxpayers because they all got a tax cut. I got into some of the wealthier homes, and I was astounded, by the way, at your property taxes here. They're as bad as ours. That's a huge problem. I know Fred and Mark Molinaro will fight for that. We need to reduce the burden on local governments. I supported the so-called Collins-Faso Amendment, which is actually a recast of a bill that I co-sponsored, that I believe Fred probably co-sponsored, that would take the state and local share of Medicaid and give it back to the state, where we impose the largest burden of any other state on our local governments with Medicaid, and we need to move that back and move it back. And so I'm glad that Fred is carrying the sword on that and moving that forward. That was in the American Health Care bill. It got thrown out. But we need to continue to reduce taxes. The taxes are the problem. The reason people are leaving the state is not because they can't get a job. It's because the taxes are lower everywhere else.
We need to reform out-of-control spending in Washington. Medicare spending is astronomical. Besides cutting down on waste, how can we cut these costs?
Thank you. I'm also unapologetically pro-life. Wanted a chance to answer that question. It's something I really believe strongly in. First of all, we have a couple things in government that, obviously I'm a fiscal conservative. When you get to Washington, you realize for decades and decades we've been just growing and growing our federal government. We have this, what's called automatic spending, mandatory spending, and discretionary spending. Right now, our mandatory spending is like this. This is the discretionary side. So when everyone gets upset about the omnibus, it's actually here. It's this small amount of money we're spending. Most of that was used for spending on defense. But we do have to do something about cutting fraud, abuse, and waste. In the American Health Care Act, which you're hearing I'm getting slammed for over and over, that I voted for, which was not a perfect bill, but it was the repeal and replace of Obamacare. That bill had in automatic provisions that would reduce our mandatory spending and over time and make sure that the terrible things that happened in Obamacare, where seniors and people with special needs are actually put at a huge disadvantage to younger people, 27-year-old, able-bodied, childless adults as they call them. We're actually getting almost 100% subsidies, while seniors and people with special needs and small children, especially those with life-threatening diseases, we're actually paying more. So what we try to do is realign it through the American Health Care Act and give seniors a chance and give what they were lost from Medicare being robbed in order to fund the American Health Care Act. So in the American Health Care Act, which I voted for, which passed the House of Representatives and did not pass in the U.S. Senate because John McCain voted no on it. That bill had provisions in it. We are going back to the drawing board. We understand that it is a huge problem. It is adding tremendously to our debt and deficit. One of the ways that we're getting around that and trying to deal with it is we're gradually, as we grow government, and you're seeing huge increases in GDP growth. Last quarter you saw 4.2%. We're on track to stay even stronger by the end of the year. As we grow, we need to also deal with spending. We need to continue to cut as we go along. There are spending cuts in place on the next appropriations bills that will be coming out that we voted on that will be completed in September. Thanks. Sorry, I'm trying to talk fast. That under so that we as taxpayers and the Congress can vote on the budget. We can provide oversight to the budget with all of our committees, and that's something that should be happening. I do think they're too powerful. And I think the Fed has proven that they don't always know a lot about fiscal policy, especially under Janet Yellen. I had the opportunity to actually interview Janet Yellen when she appeared in front of our committee. She made a lot of accusations. Oh, well, the reason that our economy is on a downturn is because the baby boomers are all retiring. Well, we reminded her of a couple of the census data points, and you can find this on census, which is really interesting for all of you to look at. One of those things that she argued while their weak Fed policy, in my opinion, was that baby boomers are actually, and that's the 55 plus category, we're actually working more than we ever have, and more than our labor participation rates are much higher than the 18 to 55 category, especially among men. And that's a huge problem that talks about what's happening in our society. So artificially manipulating the market with interest rates and what Janet Yellen was doing under the Fed actually hurt our economy. Now you hear our economy is roaring pretty much everywhere but New York, New Jersey, California, and Illinois, where you have oppressive tax and spend liberal regimes running the states. You're seeing a real strong rebound. And part of the reason that the interest rates have remained somewhat stable is because the policy is realigning itself instead of the artificial printing of money that the Fed was doing under Obama and creating a false economy. We actually have a much more realistic economy. There's a lot more consumer confidence, and you're seeing that reflected in our GDP.
Congresswoman Tenney, according to the Cato Institute in April 2018, if Congress makes no reforms, federal spending is expected to rise from $4.14 trillion this year to $7.05 trillion by 2028. This rise represents an annual average growth rate of 5.5%, substantially greater than the 4.0% expected nominal growth rate of the economy. The spending increases are expected to push up federal deficits from $804 billion this year to
$804 billion, you're saying?
$804 billion. This is according to Cato.
Right.
This year to $1.53 trillion by 2028. Is this a problem, and if so, what's the solution?
Yeah, absolutely, it's a problem. We have the solution. It was in the American Health Care Act. It's a bill that would stop what we call our automatic mandatory spending. It would reduce fraud, abuse, and waste. We need to deal with our deficit. It's a huge problem. It's something that we're fighting to try to stop. Unfortunately, we are in a situation where our majority, we have a majority in the House of Representatives right now. I consider having a majority in the states and the U.S. Senate. We have people that are Republican registered and run on the Republican banner in the state, in the U.S. Senate, but they don't vote with Republicans enough. And we need to have new senators elected so that we can get some of the initiatives passed. And if that happens this year and we can retain the House, you're going to see a lot of reforms made, especially on Medicaid, on Medicare, protecting Medicare and Social Security, and making sure that people who actually earn it get it. There's a lot of fraud, abuse, and waste in that. There are entire industries and businesses that are created off taking advantage of Medicaid and Medicare. And so those things are going to be stopped. We have a number of bills and initiatives on that. It's a top priority. It's a big issue. But we do see growth. There is some growth happening. Obviously, the economy growing is important. But at the same time, we do have to come up with a spending plan. And as we bring more people back to work, and as we repatriate literally billions of dollars in our money owned by U.S. corporations because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, right now, today, over $350 billion has been repatriated from overseas, from American companies, and invested back in the United States. Corning, which is right down the road here, is one of the companies that's brought a lot in. They're anticipating by the end of the year, because of this, you're going to see on track about $1.4 trillion coming back. That's American dollars and American-owned companies being repatriated to this country just because of the tax cuts and the benefits of reinvesting in American people, the American workers, which are our greatest asset in this country. And I think you're seeing that happening. So while we do that, we have to continue to be very cognizant of we need to continue to reduce the debt and deficit. We've passed the bills, we just got to get them through the Senate. Is that Mark Mulder's position or yours?
Congresswoman Tenney, there is a proposed red flag law in the Senate with a rumored bill to be presented to Congress. Where do you stand on this?
I'm totally opposed to it, and I will do everything I can to make sure that red flag bill doesn't end up in on the federal side. I don't think it will. I'm a co-sponsor of the National Reciprocity Act. Hopefully, Richard Hudson, the congressman from North Carolina, who is the person who was the main sponsor of that bill, we're pushing to get it in. We're hoping the president was going to include it when he passed the Fix NICS bill. He didn't do that. We think there was some intervention from some people that were more less Second Amendment advocates than I am, and that we were. But hopefully we'll get that through. Just going to tell you a little anecdote, since I know I'm trying to be quicker. But my son called me the other day and said, "Hey, Mom, I just got out of the gun store. I just bought 2 pistols." He doesn't have a pistol permit in New York State. He's an active duty Marine, but he's in the state of Pennsylvania, which is very free compared to the state of New York. So on the Freedom Index, we really need to roll back this assault on our Second Amendment rights, and I support all the efforts, and I know Senator Akshar supports, and I know Mark Molinaro also supports repealing the SAFE Act. It's going to be a tough project until we can change the makeup of the Assembly, and of course the makeup of the governor's office, and hopefully, and we're praying that we keep the Senate.
The trade tariffs are hurting our farmers and causing price hikes that suck up any tax benefits Trump promised and you support. How can you support this?
Actually, I didn't impose the tariffs, the president did. So I do think that limited tariffs are proving to be somewhat effective. I don't support the tariff. Actually, I led the letter when Canada has violated NAFTA by violating Class 7 dairy pricing, which has cost the state of New York $48 million last year alone. And we're yet to find out what it's going to cost in 2018. We're trying to get Ambassador Lighthizer to fine Canada and prevent them from being able to do that on the dairy pricing. And generally on the tariffs, and the president was trying to use tariffs as a negotiating platform. There's some debate about whether that's working or not, but I've talked to people that have mixed reviews. There's some steel manufacturers and people in my community who are really supportive of tariffs. They said that steel is being dumped. On the ag side, I know it's really hurt big states like Kansas and others that are producing soy and other the cotton producing states. The president is trying to realign the imbalance in trade and the unfairness that we've experienced for a long time. I'm not sure that this is the right answer, but he's feeling it out, and I do support the additional subsidies, especially on dairy. The dairy farmers are really victims of New York State. A lot of their problems are an oversupply of milk caused by such other things like the governor creating us as the #1 yogurt state in the nation, and has caused some oversupply. We cannot lose our dairy farms. They're suffering under really oppressive high property taxes because of New York State, high cost of living, high wages. We have the highest minimum wage and a bizarre 3-tier minimum wage in New York State that no other state has. We're higher than our neighbors. And one of the problems that when the minimum wage was passed is we did not provide an ag exemption, which has always been part of the minimum wage. So you're seeing farmers having trouble getting labor and having people work on their farms. So on the tariff side of it, I'm hearing mixed reviews. The president, in some cases I agree with him, in some cases I don't. But I'm hearing a lot of positive feedback from steel manufacturers. They're actually happy, and some others aren't.
Congresswoman Tenney, discuss your voting record and advocacy as it relates to federal regulation during the time you've been in Congress.
Well, we have done for the first time in the history of this country, we did 14 what we call Congressional Review Act repeals. So in the first year in 2017, we rolled back burdensome regulations using the Congressional Review Act. In the history of this country, it had only been done once. Last year, we did 14 in the House of Representatives. We have rolled back, it is literally tens of billions in needless regulations have been rolled back. That is part of the main reason that our economy went into overdrive. Add the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, add some relief on protecting us in terms of health care and reducing the rates of health care, allowing people to buy across state lines, to create association health plans to lower the cost of health care, because we haven't been able to repeal Obamacare yet. You're seeing you're seeing some real things happening there. So all 14 of those were passed, first time ever. In my committee, I'm the co-sponsor of a bill that rolled back a lot of the onerous regulations in Dodd-Frank. Dodd-Frank was the Wall Street, or it was the Democrats' answer to Wall Street, the Wall Street crisis. It did absolutely nothing to do with Dodd-Frank to help the crisis. All it did is make the bigger banks impossible for them to fail, and it closed up our community banks, and because of that, we've lost over 5,000 small and community banks in our country because of Dodd-Frank. So we put forth the Choice Act, and we also put forth a bill where I had actually two bills. I'm the only freshman that had 2 bills that were passed in the House, passed in the Senate, and incorporated in what's Senate Bill 2155, which is our biggest rollback of Dodd-Frank that we've had in many years. Both of my bills involve small community banks and credit unions, and relieving some of the onerous burdens on them coming from federal regulators. That has really helped the banking community. 78% of the loans that are given to small businesses, which drive our economy, 70% of the jobs created in our communities are from small businesses. Those businesses were actually benefiting from, these banks benefit from the rollback.
Thank you. Congress, yes. All right, this is going to be the last question. As John Adams said, reality gets in the way of a lot of good ideas, and the reality is it's 8:47. So this is going to be the last round of questions, and then we'll go to the closing statements.
If people don't mind, what I'll do, and if the candidates don't mind, any questions that were not answered, I can email and they can send me a response, and I'll post it on our Facebook page, and I'll send out email blast, thank you, an email blast with their answers.
Congresswoman Tenney, did you vote to privatize Medicare, cut food stamps, and Medicaid?
No, did not. I actually don't believe in doing that. I don't believe in privatizing. I do think at some point younger people are going to should be allowed to have an option if they wanted to do some of their own investments. People were able to do that. We didn't vote for it. We didn't pass it. We actually improved the through food stamp program, otherwise known as SNAP. The food stamp program it's a misnomer coming out of the Democratic side. What we did is make sure that people who are truly needy are getting food stamps, and we realigned the program so actually people who are homeless are actually now getting it. So if many of you saw famously the Resist movement, where they took a lot of elderly people that they claimed were homeless and they were feeding them in front of my office, which is completely wrong because we actually increased food stamps to people who were needy and people who are homeless. What we did is we reduced, we added work requirements which haven't been passed by the Senate. This was in the Farm Bill. Because what we found out is actually less and less people are becoming dependent on food stamps because they're getting jobs. And when you get a job and you earn income, you are now no longer eligible for food stamps. One of the misconceptions about people who receive food stamps, the average food stamp recipient actually only receives food stamps for 10 months. People think this is a generational thing, and actually the average is only 10 months. So what we've been able to do is successfully provide training, provide food, and provide nutritional assistance to people who have now learned how to take care of themselves. They become gainfully employed, and they are no longer on the food stamp program. So by natural attrition and by a successful program, less people are actually accessing food stamps than before in our communities. So that's the actual truth about what's happening.
Okay, so now what we'll have is a few minutes from each of the candidates to just kind of wrap it up. And then if all of you could just make sure to see me to make sure I have the proper email to send your questions to. Well, it was going to be 5, but because we had so many questions, we'll leave it about 3 minutes each.
Is it me first?
Same order.
Or we do same order?
Yeah, yes,
Yeah,
I guess
same
we're all
order.
the same order. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you very much for you guys hosting this. This has been tremendous. Your stand for the Constitution, you're honoring it is really what's important. This election is one of, and I know you hear this every year, but this election is really one of the most important that I've ever experienced in my 57 years, and I've been voting. I voted in every single election since I was 18. This is about choices. You have a choice to send a member of Congress who you've already sent in a very unusual, as I said, I'm an independent, I'm an outsider, but I'm a conservative Republican that believes deeply in this Constitution. I believe deeply in this system of government and what we preserved. And we are going to lose this very wonderful system of government, the greatest in the world, though not perfect, but the greatest created in the history of man, if we make a mistake and send the wrong person to Congress, to the Senate, and a number of other positions. We may not be able to control everything, but we can control what happens in the House of Representatives. I'm running in what's been called the top 10 targeted seat. Donald Trump won this district by 16 points. I won it by 7 in a 3-way general and a 3-way primary. You know who I am. You know what I stand for. I'm a constitutionalist. I'm a conservative Republican. I am fighting and working every single day as your advocate. I have brought unprecedented amounts of resources back to this community without having to increase spending. I've scoured appropriated funds to try to help our communities using grants to protect our fire, to protect our veterans. I voted for the veteran, my very first bill was the Veterans Transparency Act, voted for the Veterans Accountability Act, the Veterans Mission Act. I care deeply for our veterans, the 60,000 people who serve this country honorably, who are retirees and people in this community are very important to us and important to our community. Helping our people with special needs, of course, is a huge priority. Something that I fought for not only in the state level, but also on the national level. Getting people back to work, getting our communities stable again. We've provided now jobs. The biggest complaint that I have is I do my roundtables around this community, and I've done many with over 100 businesses. They love the tax cuts. They're employing people, they're giving raises. As I said, hundreds of millions of dollars have come into this district because of the tax cuts, because of the perseverance of our side and also the president of making, and this money isn't coming through a tax freeze that the governor gives you like on your property taxes. This money literally goes into the pockets of the taxpayers. It's just a deduction right at it's less that you're paying to the federal government and you own it. And this is really important. That's freedom. That's what this country is about. And you have a choice to do that, or you could vote for someone who is going to vote for government takeover of healthcare, which will put all of us, whether you are in a union-backed healthcare, whether you have a private employer, you will get in the back of the line behind illegal immigrants and everyone else, and you will bankrupt the state of New York. And as Senator Akshar referred to Alexandria Ocasio earlier, $32 trillion nationwide, but that the government health care that my opponent has voted for four times, will bankrupt the state of New York and cost us $90 billion annually. That's a disaster, and he will do that on the national level. That's something they're advocating for, and I think we need to wake up, because socialism is on our doorstep right now, and if we don't vote and we don't get everyone out and vote, we're going to have it here, and we're going to lose this great republic. Thank you.